Time to Shine Today podcast varsity squad. It's Scott Ferguson. I have a 2.0 interview with my good friend Aaron Bethune from We Write Stories. Full transparency, I am kind of collaborating with him regarding helping people get their stories out there to the world, to help them write them, to help them share their experiences, to help others level up. And we covered everything from the new AI phenomenon in story writing to using their coaching aspect and how they use it to really help you kind of jar loose what's in your brain to put it on pen to paper. So I'm so blessed to bring this to you. Aaron's such a great guy. I pick his brain quite often on things that I might get caught on. It doesn't even have to do with stories or whatnot. So I know that you're going to love this. If you have any aspiring authors out there, please share this with them. Or if you are, just reach out to me and let me make a warm introduction to Aaron and We Write Stories. And if you liked it, please smash the like button and subscribe button. My sponsors and affiliates absolutely love that. So without further ado, here is my 2.0 interview with my good friend Aaron Bethune from We Write Stories. Let's level up. Time to Shine Today podcast varsity squad. This is Scott Ferguson, and I am super stoked because I have a 2.0 interview with my good friend from north of the border, Aaron Bethune. He has a company called We Write Stories, and I am, just full disclosure, I'm involved, affiliate for it, going to be promoting the heck out of it with regards to helping you get your story out to the world. He has like I guess you could call it a la carte or a buffet or however you want to say it, like of things to offer for you to get your story out there. Because a lot of places that I'm approached with, whether I'm at convention or other places, and they're trying to pound, oh, we'll write your story, we'll do this, we'll do that, and they don't break it down like my guy Aaron does. Aaron is an adventurer. He's from climbing the Andes and making records to speaking around the world and working with legit celebrities, musicians, entrepreneurs, charities, government, and corporations. Aaron is always excited to see life through a new lens and help others uncover a new perspective. He's a guy that levels up on the daily. So me and him we rock our squads together. And Aaron, thank you so much for coming on. Please, and again, introduce yourself to the Time to Shine Today podcast varsity squad. But first, what superpower do you have that really no one knows about until now?
I think it's a superpower, perhaps, that I've learned for myself, which is I've learned that I have a lot of patience. And I have also learned that I am able to listen, and that by listening, it gives me such valuable insight that that whole quote around you don't learn something from hearing yourself speak
Ooh,
has really amplified in a big way, because it's amazing what happens when you listen to others and what
you
sort of
think?
information comes from that. Absolutely.
Well, I have to add to your repertoire of superpowers is like curiosity, bro. Because I'll tell you what, it's like we had a conversation, I guess maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago, and you were like really more interested. It'd be so hard to meet you at a networking event because you're more interested in my story than telling me yours, right? So if we're like, that's the thing at a networking event, brother. It's like my biggest goal is for me to walk away from somebody and then go, what the hell does he do? Because it's like I'll get their card. I use the Ford technique, family, occupation, recreation, dreams. Once I know everything, and I go out to my car, write a thank you note to them, and ask for a one-on-one and drop it in the mail, right? And I was
Right.
like, dude, the Aaron's the same way. So if we were to meet, we'd just be asking each other questions and listening for shit, man. So that's awesome, man. So tell me what's been going on with you, brother.
Well, it's before I go there, I have to say I think curiosity is so key to every learning experience in life. And
Hmm.
for me, my background started in the entertainment industry, and a big part of it was driven by curiosity, because as a musician myself, I wanted to figure out how do you make a living for music. And as I discovered the different aspects of what it takes to have a career in music, I would get curious about, well, there must be more to it. There must be more to it. So I ended up working in every aspect of the music industry because of that curiosity. And then I got curious from there. Well, okay, music obviously is not contained to one industry. It's all over the world. It affects
Right.
everybody. And how does it affect people? And that sort of took me outside of the music space and working with all kinds of people and organizations. But the curiosity thing, I just I actually talk about that a lot with my kids, and saying how important it is to be curious and to tap into that curiosity, because
Right.
you learn so much, and you get an opportunity to both learn about other people, as you're saying, in those networking events, but you're also able to I guess I could segue into what I've been doing in my case when it comes to working with authors with books. It's amazing to find out about other people's lives and coming at it from this place of curiosity, because I think what we end up finding is that we think we're living in a world where we're interacting with other people, which we are, but I think it's rather surprising how contained our own experiences are to ourselves.
Oh my gosh,
And
dude.
like when you get into social media, you see just a very thin slice of people's life and reality and compare your entire life and reality to that person's one little moment. I think it's an indication of how far off the mark we are of really connecting on a human level with where people are actually at in their lives and that interaction. And so when you get a chance to hear people's stories, it's really intriguing to see how many overlapping challenges we all have and how, we are going through this experience of life, and we may be at different chapters of our lives, but
Yeah.
ultimately that we're in this place together. And I think that both from a curiosity standpoint, from listening, but also just sharing, it's amazing. And so, yeah, I'm full heartedly on board with your concept of curiosity and how impactful that is as a superpower.
Do you think that the curiosity really that you have launched We Write Stories? Because you want to, like, okay, my podcast I started literally December 19th of 19, and I did it super selfishly. I wanted to meet people like you, other coaches, entertainers, whatever, to pick their brain because I'm super curious to level up my game, right? But coming from a place of like getting it on platforms, I got ranked in the top 2%, blah, blah, blah. But it all stemmed from curiosity. So you think that curiosity really pushed you into We Write Stories? Because, dude, you some ballers out there, dude. You know what I'm saying? Like you partied with them, hung out with them, but you're like, okay, I'm going to help people write books, right? So,
Yeah, so it was a bit of a curiosity. The curiosity actually, it's going to sound funny, but the curiosity was my own of going, this is curious. Every person I've ever worked with, I end up in this sort of position of almost as a coach, because if you're here in life and you want to be here, it's not just an external piece that has to change, it's the internal piece that has to change with it. And so no matter what role I was playing, I found myself in this position of helping people develop themselves in that sort of personal development space. And it happened to be within music, and later on it got into other industries as well. But what was interesting was that if we didn't work on someone's personal development, there was no clear path to success. Because if you don't have the ability to constantly be improving yourself, the goals that you set, you never reach them. And talent just gets you to the start line. And so, in that sort of
that's
recognizing
strong,
of what
bro.
was well, and it's true, right? And as I recognized that that's what was happening, I felt like, okay, this is something that's naturally happening. I love working with people and helping people to achieve their goals. So I thought, well, maybe I should focus that as the main thing that I want to do, because I'd got into the music space took me into film as well. And then ultimately I ended up working with government agencies. I created the role of music and culture ambassador for the state of Mississippi. I ended up doing things all over the world with sports organizations and things like that. But ultimately it always came back to, if I go to the music and culture ambassador role, for example, it started with a conversation with my client. What do you want to do? What will be success? How do we achieve success? And it started with my clients saying they wanted to be the spokesperson for the state of Mississippi, which they actually already were. They just didn't recognize they were. And so we
Wow.
positioned that with the governor. That's how it ended up becoming a reality. And so it no matter what the project, it always involved that personal development piece. So I thought, okay, I'm going to launch a coaching company, and I'm going to, launch it with a very sort of specific goal in mind, and most likely continue to work with the types of people I've been working with, but now in a full-on kind of coaching
Sure.
position. And so I started doing my research, and I realized that coaching is going to be in very, very similarly what yoga was. At one point in time, yoga was not cool. And people were, I mean, my grandmother was a yoga teacher, my mother, my aunt. It was kind of embarrassing.
Yeah.
And now, people wear yoga pants just to tell the world that they do yoga.
Right.
And I thought, here we are in a time in which people are starting to value experience over ownership. And it made sense to me that for someone who is paying for their Netflix subscription, that at some point in time they would see the value in paying for a guide to the best experience of their life, which would be a coach.
Yeah.
And so I sort of went down that path, and I started thinking to myself, okay, well, I'm not sure what the coaching industry's product really is beyond getting a retainer and hoping to hit certain goals. But there wasn't necessarily a product. And this overlapped with a time when people started just out of the blue saying, hey, Aaron, you've written some books. How did this happen? How do you do it? And I started to just have those kind of conversations. And then I I suddenly realized from a personal experience that the process of writing a book is very transformational. There's a real requirement to focus your thoughts, to be able to take all of your information, knowledge, life experience, and put it into a concise format that transmits that to somebody else. And this experience was very recent for me in a book that I'd been writing that was sort of a personal book. And I thought to myself, well, there doesn't seem to be a clear product to me in the coaching world. And the process of writing a book is transformational. And if you can transform with it, the chances of being able to help transform your audience are pretty strong. And so I basically took time away from the music industry, and I decided, it was started, the idea emerged for me in 2017, and we launched the company in 2021, which is during, of course, the the pandemic. And I realized that it, as much as, I mean, I'll tell people this, what makes us exactly the same as every other company out there is we will write a book for you and we'll put it out there and distribute and do all the rest that you would expect. What makes us unique is the process. And so what I decided to do was to find the process that would enhance the transformational aspect to it, that sort of coaching piece, while still putting out a product that would look like any other book that sits on a shelf, that reads like any other book, and ideally becomes a best-selling book. But at the end of the day, that the process would be what would make the experience unique. And so we set about creating the process and going through proof of concepts. And what we ended up with was a process that doesn't, it's not ghostwriting. We actually have a team of people that worked with the authors. And out of this process, we get to a finished manuscript. And so what's really great about it is we're able to get people involved in this process in areas that they are experts in, which doesn't require being a writer. You need writers, but you don't need writers at every step of the way. And so we ran 16 books as proof of concept, which I think a few people have told me here, and that was a little overkill. And I would say
I would have
maybe,
said that, but
but
there's a
right.
method to your madness, so absolutely, bro.
Well, the thing about it is it's like, okay, at some point you're going to find avatars, you're going to find sort of overlaps with people. I'll tell you one thing, like for example, at first I thought, okay, this is a pretty touchy-feely process because we require that people get pretty vulnerable. A big conversation that we have is nothing goes to print until you say it's okay to go to print. And for us to have really transparent, vulnerable, open conversations, we have to make it known that your story is safe with us. And so to get to that place, it's not what does someone want to hear? What does someone need to hear? How should I say it? You don't get into that space. You simply share your story. And in order to do that, you have to have this sort of safe space. And I thought, well, this is a touchy-feely sort of experience. And some of the first people through the door, so to speak, were alpha male kind of guys. And I was like, I don't know. Are they going to sort of think, oh, this is too touchy-feely for me? But what was interesting through doing all these different books was that it was actually some of these alpha male guys that were really requiring this process because it was something that they weren't bringing to their own lives. It's that typical kind of, how you doing? Great, right? There's no further comment. Yeah, life's great.
It's like their own
And
therapy in a sense.
absolutely. And so we had these different types of people show up. And what we were really happy about is that our process, as much as each book is unique, the process works with everyone. And there's some very key components to it. One thing is that, so we use non-judgmental empathetic listening. And so every author to date has said things like, I feel heard for the first time. It's been better than a lifetime of therapy. People have gained clarity in hearing their story. And there is some science to it. Like, so for example, when we have an experience in our life, we hold that experience, and our memory is finite. And so we don't keep all the details, but we do hang on to the feelings and the pieces that stand out, right? And so what happens is we take that feelings and emotions of that experience with us into the future. And quite often we're carrying that same experience that we had, let's say, when we we're 7 years old, with us today, 47 years old. And what happens when we actually externalize these stories, of which sometimes these stories never have been externalized. They've been carried with us, but they haven't been externalized. So when we externalize them, now we actually start to become the listener of our own words. And you're sharing this story, and you're actually taking what's being held onto in your mind, and you're actually externalizing it, so you don't have to hang on to it in the same way anymore. So you're actually getting space in your mind instead of that sort of memory that's getting filled up with this stuff. You're actually able to let go of some of it. And so what happens is that now you've externalized the story. Now you've had an audience to it who've truly listened. There's been no interruptions. It's not like if you go to a dinner party and you had some experience with a friend and the two of you at that dinner party, and you start saying, oh, it was this and it was that, and then they say, no, it wasn't quite like that. They give pushback because their experience of the same thing was slightly different. In our case, we listen, we don't push back. We want to hear what you felt and what went on in your point of view and your experience. And as we do that, the author themselves starts to hear their story. Now, if I go back to that idea of a story of when they were 7 and now they're 47, it's actually the 47-year-old who's listening to that story of them when they were 7.
Right.
It forces them into this position of recognizing, wait a second, that's kind of crazy. Or how could I be thinking about it like this still when so much of me has changed, yet I've been carrying that same feeling and emotion for so long?
Sure.
And then what we're able to do is we hear these stories, but we're actually able to even identify how people talk about these stories. So right down to the type of words that people use, and words are powerful. They're icons for much greater meanings. And so when we hear how people talk about these stories, we actually are able to, hear the story, but then when we turn around and help people to turn these books into things like speaking engagements, we're able to shift how they perceive the stories now by also working with how they talk about them. And as you do this, it's amazing how your perspective on these experiences shift and change. And so without fail, every one of our authors have had this experience of being heard for the first time, heavy weights lifted. They'll say things like, well, I say a lifetime of therapy, which is a slippery slope in some ways, because that's
I
not
feel
what,
you.
we're not
Yeah.
therapists. But they have these experiences. And what's really amazing is they get focus on the things that have served them and the things that have not served them. So in the end, people actually end up making more money. They have more clarity on how they want to align their actions with their intentions. I was talking to an author not so long ago who felt they were in a funk. And because we had gone through their entire sort of life story, what was really interesting was to see that they were saying, I can't understand how I grew up in the ghetto, and then fast forward, I'm having lunches with billionaires at the end of last year. How did that happen? And as we've gone through their story, one of the ways that happened was that curiosity, of course, a big piece of that, was that in every step of their story, when they leveled up, it was because they would, what you call it, punch above their weight class. If it was doing something that was bigger than themselves, the fact was is they had to stretch in order to get to that next place. And so between curiosity and pushing themselves beyond their existing limits, setting the bar higher and going for it, they were finding themselves in really intriguing situations. And so when they got to this place where they felt like they were in a funk, it didn't take much to realize that it was because instead of reaching for the next thing and going above and beyond themselves and maybe finding a greater meaning, a greater purpose than just a business deal, they were in this position where money wasn't really the issue, but at the same time, they weren't finding fulfillment. And as soon as they recognized that what they were currently doing was leaning on what they already had and what they already knew, and they were actually not going for something greater than themselves or where they were at. So it was like the following week we speak and they're like, hey, this is what's gone on in the last 7 days. And it was life changing because they'd acknowledged, like, yeah, I recognize that I've been letting myself basically just not relax, because I think everyone needs to relax.
Your process
But
allows them to stretch their comfort zone inch by inch, right? Like it's not like boom, you're out of it, right? It's like you have them stretch it. And and I'm just kind of like reading you back my feelings here that during that time they're giving themselves the grace and space, and it also becomes almost therapeutic for them to see it from a 47-year-old on the view back down, right?
absolutely. And I think that the thing is that and this is just my own personal experiences, and it's definitely emphasized in at least Western culture, that being busy is good, sleep is for when you're dead. There's this sort of attitude that go 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 is a good thing.
Right.
And I personally have my greatest ideas when I'm, whether it's on a holiday, I spend time meditating. For me, those moments away are opportunities to reflect. And I think that in some ways, whether you go on some sort of a retreat, or whether you take a vacation, or whether you go become a yoga instructor in India after a month, whatever you do to find that sort of moment to pause and reflect, it's incredible how impactful that is. And so this process really, I mean, if our why is to help people pause and reflect and uncover who they are. Our how is to use frameworks, including books, to help people to pause and reflect and uncover who they are. And our what becomes books, but it's also events and masterminds and other things like that. And it's when you pause and reflect that I think you gain the most clarity around who you are, what you want to do, what your life purpose is, how to align with that. And it's amazing how many people, I mean, I've met a lot of unhappy, successful people. And it's not supposed to be that, right? It's
No.
supposed to be that I make all this money and I'll be so happy and I'll do this and I'll be so happy. I've met a lot of really unhappy, successful people. And I think that if you don't pause and reflect, then that's when you can crash and burn. And so, in many ways, this is a process to pause and reflect, except you get a book out of it. And so, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of leveraging
You could
opportunities of
become a
that as
better
well.
person to yourself, which you could feed over into your family and friends because they see that. I can see the therapy that's actually working without, and like you said, it's a slippery slope there, but I like that. So let's dig in a little bit into the process, my dude.
Yeah, yeah.
And Scott, me and AB were kind of just joking off Mike because he's from north of the border and they say process and we say process. It's just kind of funny. Anyways, like let's get into that process, man. Like what would have to happen if it was people out there are wondering, hey man, I got a story inside me. I know, just never knew how it went. What's the process with rewrite stories?
Yeah, so our process is a little different than how I think a lot of people approach writing a book. There's a lot of different approaches, and of course, there's a lot of information out there for anyone that's never written a book that wants to write a book.
Sure.
But a common one is to come up with an outline and to work from the outline to create the book. In our case, we say show up, and we're going to figure out what the book's about through going through this process.
Mm,
So our very first step, we do have an onboarding form, which is it's fairly lengthy because we are going to write a book together and we want to make sure we're on the same page before we start. But ultimately, what we do is we have this intake aspect, and then the next thing we do is we set up what we call the overview and outline sessions, and that is for us to get a very high level view of your life. And so we do just that. We don't let you get into the details. And
mm,
when you do this high level overview, you naturally underscore your peaks and valleys of life. And so we go through this first step, and that enables us to have a better understanding. So between the onboarding form, our conversations prior to starting, then this sort of first couple sessions in which we're getting this overview and outline out of this high level 30,000 foot view, then essentially we do create an outline and we start to have an understanding of the type of book and what we're trying to accomplish with telling
right.
your story. Then essentially what we're doing is we're zooming into those stories and we're getting the information and the details and the background and the experience. And then we zoom in further and we're getting the insights and how those insights are still informing decisions today. And so it's a process in which we do have an outline, but it's conversational. So when we're having these conversations, we we were challenged with someone said, "Can you do a book for X?" And we thought, okay, we'll take on this challenge. And we were actually able, believe it or not, to create a book with 6 hours of audio from our author. And
Wow.
that, on one level, it is wow, it is amazing, I think, on one level. And that was a 200 plus page book, which is a great book. And I know
Was it you guys
I'm
interviewing him or just brain dumping or like,
and it was an interviewing process. That being said, the 6 hours, I would say it was amazing on the one hand, but essentially that's not our end goal. Our goal isn't to see how quickly we can do it. We know how quickly we can do it. And for certain clients and certain products, we can do things that quickly.
sure.
But ultimately, what we want to do is we want to get to the point where we're certain that your story has been told, and the experience of telling your story is like anything else. I mean, you don't get on the call the first time and you're just like at ease and feeling like a natural storyteller. We have to get there, right? And so we have these conversations on a weekly basis in which we're getting these insights. And we actually have what we call a story explorer and a story analyst that's part of the conversation with the author
Mm,
themselves. And we actually take all of our conversations and we have transcripts that come from it. We color code things. We get into even analyzing word choices. And we essentially gather all of this information. And when we've reached our sort of ending point of the phase that we refer to as story exploration, at that point in time, we take all of that content and we begin structuring it so that we're able to start turning that into the book. And then from there, it goes into what we call story magic, where we have a storyteller put all of those pieces together so that the book now becomes a page turner. So the experience that the author has in that story exploration phase is where they get a lot of that sort of transformative benefit. We're able to pair people with coaches after that if that's something that makes sense, which I definitely advocate, but
sure.
it's not for everyone. That being said, we have people that want to write their own books. And so we'll go through that story exploration phase with them, and then we'll turn around and we'll give them all the assets that we create, which includes things like chapter summaries, book summary, the outline, sample chapter that's been approved by the author. And they can take that information and start writing their book so they never deal with a blank page.
Sure.
So it's kind of this combination of sharing your story, telling your story, gaining insights into your experiences that you can reapply into your life to better align your actions with your intentions,
Mm,
coupled with us basically writing your book for you
right.
or working with you to write your book yourself. There's definitely people for both of those ways to go. I mean, some people really do want to write their own book, and I think it's an amazing experience to go through. But our sort of, I guess you could say, our flagship product is we write it for you, where you don't put pen to paper. And it's very, very insightful because you start to see these patterns with authors in this overlap of human experience. And I think, again, that the process of being able to tell your story in a way that is able to be organized for you, it's I have a hard time not going into music metaphors. So for
No, I feel
example,
you.
when a
Yeah.
band or an artist comes to the studio with a song to the producer, quite often that song may, whether it's full band or someone's playing on an acoustic instrument, that's the version of the song when it got to the studio before the
Right.
producer and blah blah blah. When you create that song in the studio and you've got that finished produced piece, that's what the band or the artist takes on the road to perform, because that's the version of it.
Right.
And they've learned something in that experience, undoubtedly, which turns into the absolute best version of that song they want to then perform to the world.
Right.
And this is very much like that.
That's a
It's
book.
your
Yeah.
song, it's your story. But
Yeah.
going through this process is enabling us to help you tell your story in the best possible way. You've done a lot of work in this by being able to share,
Mm,
and that's going to have changed you. And then what we want to do is make sure that that experience gets put into a book so we can change more people than just the author, but also the audience that it goes to.
love
And
it.
it is similar in that way.
Yeah, it's
That's
very similar. There's a lot of parallels to that. So the perfect writer for you, is it any genre, any, or are you more like self-help or business parables, or what's the story there?
so I mean, if you're looking for a label, I would call it nonfiction, creative nonfiction. So that would get into the space of a number of the things you just said.
Heroes,
Uh,
journeys, yeah, man. I get, yeah,
yeah,
across the board.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, for example, we do have different types of books that we do, which we sort of identify with the author as being the right fit. We have expert books and transformational books, brand books, family legacy books. There's
Sure.
a lot of people out there that want to share the stories of their parents and grandparents. That being said, the ideal, instead of talking about the ideal author, essentially what you get out of this is a book that tells your story, and stories are the best way to share information anyways.
Absolutely.
That's what we do. And then we always have insights as part of the book, so we're able to, like, from a design standpoint, we want people to get content that matters from anywhere they essentially open a page. And
Right.
so whether you're getting short insights and summaries of chapters, if you're reading the stories, we want that information to be valuable to the audience. If you're a marketing guru and we're writing a book that taps on your experience as a marketing guru and you want to help other people
Right.
become marketing gurus, you're going to achieve that. But we're not just going to say, do this, this, and this, and you
Right.
two
Add the
become a
story
marketing guru.
aspect to it,
It's
right?
exactly, and
Yeah.
you need that context of story to understand how that person became who they are,
Mm.
sorry. And by understanding how they became who they are, you get a much better understanding of how you yourself might want to follow in their footsteps. Like, it's not about doing what someone else does, it's about being who they are. And I don't mean you give up who you are to become somebody else, but if you want to replicate the success of somebody else, you can't replicate the things they did. You have to replicate the place they came from. And that is shared through story. So
That's
when you are looking at, I mean, music again is a good example. Like, if everyone wore a meat dress, it doesn't mean they'd have the success of, well, we all know who wore a meat dress, but the point to Lady Gaga, the fact is it's not doing what another successful person did in order to be successful. I mean, in
she had
some ways,
creativity, she had that, and so that you can apply that into your life in your own way, right?
absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
where was she coming from? Who was she being in order to be able to take that sort of risk, put herself out there? I mean, if you look at singers, I mean, the greatest singers that we can all think of have a unique voice. So you're not going to be unique if you imitate that singer's voice or try and sound more like or be more like or look more like.
Right.
But I think if you align with who they are as where they're coming from, then you have a much greater chance at
Yeah.
success in any field. And so that's a big part of sharing stories. Is it's not a, here's a book on how to become a, chess master.
Sure.
There's still an aspect of, well, how does that person enable their brains to foresee moves in the future?
Laterally
What,
think and stuff. Yeah. Okay.
exactly.
I
So
love it.
that's
So,
that's
Aaron, what do you think? The a lot of people are bringing up this AI stuff, right? It's like, what do you think about? Are you aligning with it, or are you totally against it? Or I just have to ask you because you are in the
yeah,
business with it.
that's I love that question. And that's very present for, I think, a lot of humanity right now.
Sure.
So when ChatGPT came around, obviously AI has been in things for a long time,
Yeah.
but ChatGPT, I think, really made waves in the general public. And when that showed up, of course, if you're in the business of writing, you could be concerned. Now, for me, I see it as being very similar to music. Music is about, this is my opinion, and
No,
any
please.
listener out there will have theirs. I think with music, one of the most important things for great music is to have the human eras, the emotion, the raw elements that make for the human experience to resonate amongst us. So, for
Yeah.
example, when you hear someone's voice crack slightly, you could call that an imperfection, but it's the imperfection of it that makes for it to be perfectly aligned with helping you feel something. So when we go
Yes.
into the
Thank
studio and
you,
we
bro.
start to remove all of the imperfections,
Yeah.
something starts to sound off. So if you take auto tune, for example, which tries to perfect the tuning of your voice, in my sort of producer mind, my feeling is we need to find an element within the music that's going to still tap into the imperfection of the human
Right.
experience. So when we look at things like AI, like ChatGPT, first of all, it's reviewing the past. It's looking up until I think 2021, and it's doing very much like you could do in the studio with magic.
Sure.
It's not able to recreate intuition or creativity, but it's able to recreate what the product of intuition and creativity was. And in that sense, it's creating almost too much perfection in the writing. Even if you ask it to write in all sorts of styles and you feed it all the information you can, it cannot be the imperfect human that we are. And our
Thank you.
word choices
Right.
are how we create emotion and feeling in others. And they're not perfect. And sometimes it's the absolute grammatically incorrect thing to say or do. But the reality is, it's the most effective way to communicate a feeling and an emotion. So, on the one hand, the idea that AI is going to write your books for you, sure, you can feed it information to a point and you can achieve that goal, but something's going to feel off. Something's not going to
Still
make
got to
quite a
put
lot
your
of sense.
flavor on it, man.
Yeah, like I tell myself, are we in 5 years' time going to be telling our friends along the lines of, man, I just finished my fifth AI book. It was amazing. I can't believe like that latest AI single, like that is so good. Like, I'm not saying it's not going to happen. Maybe it will, but I have
Yeah.
a hard time thinking it. Now, the other
Sure.
part of it is we have competition in the world, which is really healthy and great. And I'd say they're not really competition because they've been doing it for longer than us.
Sure.
That being said, their why is ultimately to try and help everyone on the planet tell their story, share it with the world. And I would say the fastest way to do that is using AI. In our
Sure.
case, our whole thing is this human experience, the opportunity to pause and reflect so that we're able to share that one to one human thing.
Right.
And AI is not going to do that.
Nope.
Now, what I will say is, what I'm very fascinated with is how AI is able to help with organization and things like that. I will say, for example, there's studies out there that show that AI was 85% more accurate than judges when it came to who could be able to post bail. And that was because
Oh,
they had no feedback of the human face, right? They weren't able
right.
to, oh, this person looks sorry. I think they're not going to do anything bad while they're out on bail. The AI didn't look at that. They just looked at the data. And the AI for that reason was more accurate than the judges. So one of the things that AI is really good at is it is able to look at things like transcripts and provide information from what it perceives that I don't think any human would necessarily hit on in the same
Right.
way as AI can.
Sure.
So from our standpoint, I'm very interested in how AI can help reduce some of the elements of busy work,
Yeah.
and by doing that, enable for the human work to be more valuable, more focused, more in line with what people love to
Unleash
do,
more creativity in the human.
unleash more creativity.
Yeah.
Like, I think, like, if we were simply having a conversation around AI, of which I've definitely had lots of these conversations,
Sure.
my thing to anyone would be, and I have a friend who's a data scientist, and they did this little diagram where they said, here's an amateur's knowledge in a certain field, and here's an expert's. And of course, the experts is larger than the amateurs for people that don't see my fingers. When the amateur adds AI, it surpasses the expert's
Sure.
knowledge. When the expert adds AI, it far exceeds the
Blows it up.
amateur's knowledge. The point is, though, is if you're going to go out there and use AI and say, I want you to write a blog post about the 10 top things to wear to Mars next summer, then or the best SEO tips and tricks for 2024, you don't have to have any understanding of Mars fashion or of SEO. It will do that for you. But
Sure.
the most effective way in order to be able to use the tools that exist is you need to know the outcome you want and you need to understand the input you're providing. So if you have the understanding of the input, the knowledge, the experience, the expertise, and you've created what's going to go in it yourself and exactly what you want to get out the other end, then that tool can become useful. But to
Gotcha.
just show up and say, there's a tool, I'm going to ask it this, and it's going to do this great job, think again. Right?
That's awesome. Best freaking explanation of how to use the AI for organization. Absolutely, dude. Yeah, I was taking notes like crazy while you're saying it because I mean it's like the AI takes away a lot of the person. Like if you were to tell like Bob Dylan to take the nasal out of his singing, right?
You actually gave me time to think about something, and I don't want to sound like we're everything to everyone, but one of following up on the AI comment, I think the thing is that you still have to have the raw content in the first place.
Yes.
And so in our case, one of the things that we also do, which came from these books, and the process of creating these books, was we recognized that we're able to use the same process to create any size content or length of content, whether it's a book or whether it's an article. And so, for example, people that want to be thought leaders, we're able to use our exact same process to create articles for third-party platforms that help people position themselves as what I call
Sure.
leaders. But the point of the matter is that when you create content that's valuable in the first place, then you can do all sorts of things, whether it's giving it to your marketing team to tell them
Mm,
here's content for a year to go out and put out there. The fact is that these tools are amazing. There's a lot of things they need to work on to improve them. However, at the end of the day, it's the content that goes in and what you want to get out that makes those tools most useful. So, anyways, I had a moment there
no,
to
that's
think further.
fantastic, man. It's because I mean AI is awesome for me. I mean, because if I get stuck on something, I can get creative. My creativity plug it in, it'll plug me back like kind of a non-creative thing. So it helps me because I'm a Pisces dude. I'm a dreamer, right? So it
Yeah.
helps me stay leveled with that. When and AI goes so far back. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the teacher would say, everybody put their calculators away. We're having a math test. Calculator is nothing more than AI. It would you plug something in, it spit out an answer, and then of course it went to desktop computers, laptops, and everything else. But this whole new Terminator style, if you follow the Terminator movies, right, Skynet or whatever, it's like it does get a little bit crazy. But let's move into kind of like an abbreviated kind of lightning round here. I got some questions for you. You can be quick with them, but
I feel compelled to tell you one
yeah,
last thing about AI because it goes back
yeah,
to
go
the
ahead,
very beginning
buddy.
of this
Sure.
conversation around curiosity. What
Uh-huh.
I'm hugely curious about, and I'm finding this to be something I'm just really, it's in my own time and as a team too, is looking at conversations in a completely different light, which is reverse engineering the conversation. Because to go back to that idea of what you want at the other end and what you input, you
Mm-hmm.
actually have to start at what you want to then be able to come back to the input. And it's a
Truth.
really fascinating thing to look at conversations. And I guess I made a comment about someone who's a chess player. I mean, it's kind of like chess. You have to understand what moves it's going to take to accomplish your outcome. And
Sure.
I
The
think that
organization that you brought up before.
absolutely. And I think that the idea of thinking around conversations in new ways, it is a form of manipulation for sure, but I think it provides insight also into how you have conversations with people and questions, right? Because you have to be able to ask the right question to provide the right output or
Sure.
provoke the thought that goes into the answer.
Absolutely.
So
No, it's
your lightning
beautiful.
round.
You have to because yeah, 100%. If you have, what I took away from it is it'll help with the organization and be able to like I can plug in something and say, do you feel that this is you are the best writer in the world? Da da da. Da, and is this written in the right context? Is it written in the right order, chronologically, stuff like that? And like almost 100% of the time, it's kind of right, which I
Mhm.
really enjoy that. But again, they don't know my thoughts. They don't know exactly what I'm feeling, the process that goes into what I did in 51 years of my life, but it will help with the organization. So yeah, as we
Well,
move forward, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, one thing that technology repeatedly does is as it advances, it just emphasizes the importance of human creativity and intuition and the
It
things
does.
that machines cannot do. And I
Right.
think that if there's anything, people get concerned around job loss, and undoubtedly it will affect a lot of people's jobs. But at the same time, I think it's an opportunity that indicates for us that what's most important about ourselves is our human qualities.
Yes.
And
Be
when we can
unique, man.
focus
Yeah.
on those, it's
Yeah.
not giving anything up. It's actually giving ourselves an opportunity to focus further on those things. So, anyways, this is a topic I'm really interested in. That's why
No,
I
I
keep
feel you,
circling.
man, because they brought it up to me. Like I spoke at the SCAD in Savannah, the Savannah College of Arts and whatever,
Mhm.
and it was like they thought about it. I'm like, listen, become unique with your what you're doing because anybody can go on Journey or whatever and put on wherever they want, but if you sign your name and it is yours, bro, It's like that's where we're starting to bring back the Dollies, the Michelangelo, like all that stuff that you can become unique. Granted, you get more known when you're dead, but still you're actually putting out content that's yours, unique, and can blast through the time. So but yeah, we got to move on a little bit just because I want to keep
Do it.
everybody engaged. I just have so I believe in the plus equals minus like version of life, right? Like one, I find something that I want to emulate and just kind of work towards them. Equals, it's like you and I, we rap, we bounce stuff off each other. And then minus is sending that elevator down and bringing people up to you, right? I live the plus equals minus life on a daily. So who is your plus, man? Who's the one person in your life that really you said, bam, that's it, and you really want to maybe learn from them, pick their brain, or who's that person?
That's a tough question to answer because my curiosity makes me want to know about a lot of people. But I'll answer it this way. I was very recently, as in last week, I visited my childhood home, and when I lived in that home, I lived with my grandparents and my mother, and it made me think of my grandfather and what he had had to live through in order for us to live in that home.
Sure.
And I think that actually rekindled my respect and belief
That's
in what's
amazing, dude.
possible through my grandfather.
That's awesome, dude. So if people really knew Aaron, they would know what?
Well, that's interesting. I've reconnected with a lot of people from my younger years, and I have been told by many people the level of patience that I have and generosity. I was given a Tibetan name last year, in which it
Hmm.
translates to Ocean of Generosity, and I feel a little silly
What's
to
the
say
name?
that. It's Jinpa Gyatso, and I shouldn't be the one to say that, but I do resonate with that idea of generosity because I think that if we're able to serve, then other people's happiness and well-being and accomplishing their goals will undoubtedly will help us reach the same. So
Love that, man. So what did you have a really firm belief about when you were younger that's really changed?
a firm belief that's changed.
Convicted about bam, 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 but now you look back and you're like, wait a minute, dude. You
Yeah,
know?
I think that I think an important one for me being a parent is there's a moment in time where you recognize that well and truly the helping hand you're looking for is at the end of your own arm. And when you realize that anything and everything you want to accomplish is possible from your own inertia and abilities, that is a life-changing thing. So that's the shift away from whether it's parents or people around you that you feel are whether it's the people you count on or whatever. I mean, that's up to a point, right? But it's that moment in which you recognize that you yourself are an incredibly powerful being capable of anything, that is when things change, and that's what
Thank
came
you,
up for me
brother.
when you asked me.
Dude, that's freaking amazing. That's probably the best answer I've ever had on that. That's
Okay.
fantastic, dude. So how about the last question on this? But what, because you're an entertainer and you've worked with them, one record is the one that is like that you remember that just influenced you the most? I know it's hard to answer because you probably have rankings and different genres of stuff, but if you go back to that one, there was a record by ELO when I was a kid, and it just
Yeah.
stood there, and I made my mom play it and play it and play it, right? It was the one with the spaceship, it was double album. Like, what was that record, man, that you remember? Maybe the record that has the most emotional attachment to your childhood. How about that?
Oh, well, I'm going to answer it much like these last questions. When I was about 5 years old, I would ask for Elvis records. And I didn't actually know that Elvis's second name is Aaron until I was probably a teenager. So I don't know what that says about me being a fan of Elvis or not. But I was really into that sort of 50s and then 60s music
Yeah.
far before I got into other things as a guitar player. But fast forward to a few years ago, I ended up producing a record with one of Elvis's guys and with a bunch of and one of Chuck Berry's guys and
Wow.
basically BB King's guys. And I did that in a
Legends.
pretty legendary location. And it was so the record that I produced has a direct attachment to my childhood because I got to not only work with some of my childhood icons, but I got to hear firsthand the stories of those icons from those people in a space that was legendary for the type of performances that happened at it. And that the making of that record will always be incredibly valuable for me personally, independently of whether people or other people out there find it to be a good record or not. The experience of it, I mean, walking into this location with BB's guys playing The Thrill Is Gone in this bill, I mean,
Dude,
it was a
BB,
moment,
Chuck
man.
Berry, and Elvis. I mean, come on,
Yeah,
dude. That's
yeah.
legendary, bro.
Well, I'll for listeners out there, for example, Elvis used to pull his pants down on stage and moon the entire band while performing. Who knew, right? The audience didn't see it. He'd do that whole thing where they get back from tour and he'd say, "Hey, you want to go get a peanut butter sandwich?" And they'd fly across the country. Elvis used to love having a jet pilot for his air when he flew
Hmm.
because he liked to have the pilot roll the plane.
Mm.
And so they actually went on the Rolling Stones plane at one point, which had two fireplaces on it. And sure enough, Elvis got them to roll the plane. But
Oh,
just these kind of little stories, and you're like, and there's far more of them, obviously, but it was just like,
absolutely.
so that was pretty
Yeah.
momentous for me, that
I
particular
love
record.
that, man. I'm blessed to be able to work with like UFC fight set and
Yeah,
some
man.
Major League Baseball players and just hearing some of the stuff that goes on, right? And the stories that are told. It's just pioneer shit, man. That's awesome. So
Absolutely.
as we wind up here, man, how can we find you, brother?
Well, you can find me
Find
at
us now, since I'm going to be
uh,
plugged into we write stories.
absolutely. Well, you're going to be able to find us at www.wewritestories.com. And I have a personal website, which is aaronbethune.com. But for everything we've talked about today, www.wewritestories.com. And yeah, I'm always interested in hearing people's stories. And so for me, even getting on the phone with people and just getting a chance to touch base, I gain
Yeah.
from it. I think other people gain from it. And I would love to hear from anyone, whether it's through email, which I'm happy to share my email directly as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll put all that in the show notes, brother.
awesome.
Absolutely. A way to get a hold of you. And also you can get a hold of me as well for a warm introduction squad to Aaron. But I need you to leave us with one last knowledge nugget we can take with us, internalize, and take action on.
Wow. Well, I think if we tie it to story, story is how we live. And I think that if there's something that we can all do, I've mentioned this earlier, but it's listen. Give someone else an opportunity to be heard. And the best way to do that is to not think about what you are going to say next, not come back with something you're going to say. And this can be applied to anything. If someone's saying something and you have an excuse to say, like, forget all of that, but
Yeah.
listen to what someone has to say in any context of whatever that may be, whether it's they're sharing their story or they've got something on their mind they want to tell you, but just practice listening, because one of the things that's so incredible about listening is that you actually take in that information, you absorb it, and you understand something about life that you probably didn't know quite so well until you heard someone else's version of it. So that's what
Yes.
I would recommend. And the last thing
Dude,
I would say is get 8 hours of sleep a night, because it's amazing how
it
that
is
helps us
amazing,
and
bro.
our minds work better. So
I love it. It's squad. I just had a 2.0 fun conversation with my good buddy Aaron Bethune, and he's a guy that really curiosity is his jam, right? In actually listening. I mean, this guy listens with his neck. He doesn't just listen with his ears, but he listens with all of his senses, from his eyes to he's watching you for posture. He's listening for voice differences. He's really interested in your story. I mean, we think we live in an interactive world, but we are kind of so contained within our stories that it has to be let out. I mean, it's almost a form, and I say this loosely, a form of therapy to get out your overlapping challenges that we have, because you don't know who you can help. I mean, he really brought up that coaching is kind of like the new yoga. People that know me, I'm on my mat a couple mornings a week and I wear my native yoga shirt around, but coaching is really that's something that's out there that can help you value the experience and your ownership that you have. Writing a book is, Aaron reminds us, is very transformational. It's a format that will transmit to the world. And we write stories. is unique. It enhances kind of the coaching piece that's within there. So when it's done, because he does this really through empathetic, non-judgmental listening. No matter what your story is, him and his team are all of those. Again, he's a great listener and he passes that down through his team. And big thing about We Write Stories is they start with the pause and reflect, remembering and recovering who you are so you can get the best version out there, because they will help you give yourself grace and space even while you're writing through the times that were challenging for you, times that you might be embarrassed or whatnot. But people need to hear that because they're teachable moments. If you're out there and you have nonfiction and you want to kind of get creative about it, let me make that introduction to Aaron. He's going to make sure that the readers of your story really tune into who you are as the person, right? We had a fantastic conversation about AI or artificial intelligence, about it's almost too perfect. There is no intuition or creativity that's put in there, but it can help you with generating outlines, even pop ideas into your creativity. And my guy Jimba Kachu, Ocean of Generosity out there, he reminded us that the hand you are looking for is at the end of your own arm. That's strong. I mean, you can help yourself, but my guy here stood on the shoulders of giants that have helped him get to where he is. And again, listen, people love to be heard. Listen to understand and not to react or even to respond, but to really understand what that person's saying. That's what my good friend Aaron does, man. He's always leveling up his health. He's leveling up his health, wealth, and he's earned his second varsity squad letter here at Time to Shine today. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on, brother. Absolutely love your guts.
Thank you,
I'm so
Fergie.
glad that we're collaborating.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it to no end.
You better, brother.
This is
Chat soon.
awesome.